perfectionists, pleasers, peacekeepers, the comic relief out there, right? If that sounds like you, likely there's a bit of the worthiness wound in your life. It revolves around conditional love in many ways. My worth, my value is tied to my ability to
Vienna Pharaon, marriage and family therapist,
the founder and owner of the group practice,
Mindful Marriage and Family Therapy.
She has a new book out called The Origins of You.
how breaking family patterns can liberate the way we live and love.
When there is a rupture in trust, it's one of the hardest things to come back from. It really is. You know, you have parents who tell you what you're feeling isn't what you're feeling, what you're seeing isn't what you're seeing. You know, they make up something, and it's like these things that take us a little further away from our sense that something is wrong or something's not right. And when you do that over and over and over again, it's actually taking people further away from self. And so a lot of times this restoration of trust with other is actually a restoration of trust with the self.
Welcome to the Eat, Play, Crush podcast. I am your host, Mary Shanuda. I don't do formal intros, Vienna. But this is your book.
That's the formal intro right there.
This is the formal intro. And I also don't generally start with holding up someone's book, but The Origins of You is a book that many people in my life have read. And I got into it while I was cooking this last week. And let me tell you what, it's heavy in the most beautiful way.
Yeah.
But I had to stop cooking because it brings up stuff, and I'm all about energy going into what you're preparing. And I was like, all right, childhood memories. But The Origins of You is all about different wounds and your origin wound. And before even getting into what the book's about, let people know your body of work and how you decide to make your work focused on something that creates something like this. Because there's so many therapists out there who don't know how to articulate the way that you have in this book. And so I'm really fascinated about the process of when do you decide as a therapist to start writing a book?
And I think in many ways it did choose me, you know, and I know people say that and maybe it sounds a little bit corny, but I think my life's journey is what brought me to writing the book. And I always say that you get into the field of therapy, whether you know it or not, to resolve that which is unresolved in your own life. And that was true for me. And I didn't know it at the time. I went to grad school to become a marriage and family therapist because I thought I was good at talking to people about their relationships, and people would come to me with their stuff just as a human being. And I loved having those conversations. And
did those conversations energize you or?
Yes. There's never been anything that's been draining about being a therapist. It's deeply restorative for me, which I know is a little bit odd to say, but I think—
Why is it odd?
Because I think a lot of people will say that they do burn out. I think a lot of clinicians can burn out. And that's when, for me, there's a reciprocity actually that happens in my work. And I get to see people's growth and I get to see their commitment to what they're doing. And that fills something up, right? It is an arrow back. And I also have really good boundaries. I don't let people's stories take over my world when I'm not in it. And I think sometimes it can be common for people to kind of sit and struggle with someone else's stuff or want to fix it or solve it, right? If they're not coming from a more integrated and more, emotionally mature place, right? Is a lot of times people get into this field again, right? To solve and fix and help and save. And that's not our best motivation.
To sit across from a therapist and not know if they've done that work or if they feel like a savior.
Yeah. I mean, the intent is always good.
100%.
And it's still something that brings the arrow back to us, which is the resolution in our own lives. And I mean, it's a forever process, obviously. We don't just arrive at a point. But for me, it's funny, when I first started grad school, I had just finished undergrad. So I was 21 when I first started. And I still laugh today because I remember my professors and advisors and supervisors, talking to me, because a lot of your graduate work is your own kind of self-study of your own family of origin, how you grew up. My parents went through a 9-year divorce process when I was in first grade. It was awful, horrible, just something that kept getting extended and extended and extended. There was a lot of manipulation, gaslighting, psychological abuse, paranoia, emotional flooding. It was chaotic. The conflict was high.
This was between your parents and you're a witness to it, or are they pulling you into any of this too?
Witness to it. I think they really did do a pretty good job of not pulling me into it. But when you're there, you're there. You are in it. You're in it. You're witness to it. You're observing it. And I'm an only child. And so I didn't have siblings. There were no other people around. My parents never remarried, didn't partner. So there wasn't anybody else who was seeing what I was seeing. I was this tiny little human in this system that was crashing and burning around me. And I'm watching it go down. And I go through all of that, and fast forward, I'm in grad school, and I'm like, my parents' divorce didn't affect me. My parents' divorce didn't affect me. And I'm in school, literally, right, going in to become a marriage and family therapist, right? And I'm like, I'm good. They're friends now. And it was true that they had become friends, that we do holiday together, that we'll go, we will have Christmas together, things like that.
Yeah.
But I had skipped over so much of my life. And it was more palatable for me to be able to say, we're good.
Yeah.
They're good. They got to this point.
You played sports in college.
Yeah.
You played sports before
I played
that.
lacrosse.
Yeah. And how much of this "I got this" mindset do you think you inherited from being an athlete?
Yeah. And it's hard to say which one came first, honestly.
Right.
Yeah, right. Because it's like,
because we got this. Like, no problem.
No problem. It's all good. Because part of the role that I had taken on as a kiddo was when I saw all of this that was going on, I didn't believe whether this is true or not, right? Because if my parents were here, they might have said, that's not actually accurate. But my perception was that there wasn't room for me to not be okay, because they were so not okay, right? And so my perception was there's no room for me to not be okay. So I'm going to put all of my energy into other things. And there's no room for me to not be okay in all of those other things either. Like, I can't have problems, right? I can't have problems because there's too many over here. So I got to get good at everything that I do. And so I did get really good at sports. And I think part of that was I was naturally good at sports, but I also just invested in it. And it was a place to put, and it was a place to process, right? Movement for me, and I know for so many, right, is this beautiful place to process and to release, because there weren't other places for me to do it. So yeah, it's hard to say which came first, but I got it, and I'm headstrong, and I'm going to persevere, and I'm going to get to the other side, and I'm unaffected, and you can't be affected. Like, pick it up, get back out there, let's go, you know, all of that.
Lacrosse is a very aggressive sport too, which is amazing. And so at what point what point was it in the classroom? Was it at home doing some of the homework or the book where you're like, oh shit?
I had a few moments of it. Certainly, so I finished grad school, I become a therapist, I'm working with people, and I'm good enough to be working with people.
You go through grad school, you go through all that teaching, you're now a therapist, and you're still like, that didn't affect me?
Yeah, that didn't affect me. I'm good. Like, I'm okay. Yeah, I held on to that narrative.
And it was a soft I'm okay, right?
Yeah.
Because some people feel like, I get accused of like, oh, you're being so tough. I was like,
yeah, I don't know that it presented tough, but it was just like, I'm not going there. Like however that present, I'm not going there. So
no
you can just, just back it off. It's good. And I don't remember at the time, like if there was a part of me that had some deeper understanding. I can recall the sensations in my body. Like, I was very defensive about it. I remember a professor being like, you are affected, like something. I was like, I am not, it was like this part that wanted to go to battle, actually. And I remember reading research articles that were pointing that there are effects, like, and it was like, that's bullshit, all the stuff. And I was just so resistant to it. And obviously looking back now, it's like, we know the things that we're deeply resistant to, right, are things that hold a lot of information for us. But fast forward. And again, I think there's a skill set to being a therapist where you can go so far with clients, even if you're not really addressing all of the work that you need to address. Like, you can take people to an okay place.
Yeah,
I was doing that.
Yeah, I really think that there's a therapist for every person, and there's a therapist for every season of you, and there's a therapist for every part of you.
Totally.
Because
the different chapters.
Yeah, I've never met a therapist that can hold space for all the wounds.
Yeah.
And I don't fault the therapist for that. I'm like, okay, we're going to go as far as your skill set will allow me to go. And that's okay. So
And that I think is on us, right? Is to continue to expand our skill set. And still, there probably is a chapter in which there's a transition to someone else, just new ears, new eyes. But I think it's our responsibility to expand that skill set by continuing to resolve as much as we can. It's similar to being a parent too, right? It's like, it's interesting where people are like, how do I not screw up my child? And this, that, and the other. I'm like, you will, but the greatest gift that you can give is to continue to resolve that which is unresolved, right? Keep doing that over and over and over again. And that's going to be something that is the gift that keeps on giving to those who are coming later. But so I'm taking people as far as I can take them, which is decent. Like I'm a pretty skilled therapist sort of at the core. And then I start to notice, right? Like, oh, I'm having a hard time taking people a little bit further. I can start to sense that. And the big catalyst, I think, for me was in my personal life, maybe a little bit more than my professional life, which was I was dating someone in my late 20s. And I, at the time, was really invested in the relationship and thought that this person, might be the person I'm going to have a future with. And his ex comes back into the picture and he's trying to decide whether to go back in the relationship with her or to stay in the relationship with me. And cue me over here, therapist me who can understand anything, but also cue me who is like, I'm unaffected, nothing bothers me, as was the case my entire childhood and life prior. And so I step in, I'm like, totally understand, like, this must be so hard for you. This is complicated, which are true things, right? I mean, I think it's very important for us to hold context for people, just not at the expense of ourselves. And I was extending that in a pretty significant way and just continuing to say it was fine, it was fine, it was fine. And those words were words that I had said and uttered for decades at that point.
When you're saying it's fine to him, if you guys are having dialogue about this and he's being really open, which is healthy. It sounds like that you guys having this conversation.
Yeah.
And you're saying it's fine, like figure it out, or
it's
are
fine,
you even like
figure it out? I'm okay. You don't have to worry about me over here. I'm good, right? And there was a time where he also closed off a little bit more. And I remember having a conversation with a friend of ours at the time, and it clicked in for me. I don't know, light bulb moment, something went off where I saw that I was in the same role that I had been in as a child, right? That there was like, I finally made contact with this part of myself that was actually not okay, right? This part that was like, hang on, this actually feels really disrespectful. He was spending time with her. They were, I'm sure, hooking up, right? Like that was going on, and there was no honor and respect for what my experience was and what was going on.
Right.
And I remember just making contact with that in a moment where I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. I keep saying this thing that's not true. I'm not good. This is disrespectful. It doesn't honor me. I don't actually feel good here. And I called him up. He was living in a different state at the time. And I said, I'm going to pull myself out of this equation in so many words. And, I hope that you find the path forward for you that is most aligned and, some version of that, and hung up. And I always tell people that was not a mic drop moment. That was a like, oh, that was an empowered thing to do. And yet here, let me find myself on the bathroom floor crying for, weeks, months, maybe afterwards, right? So even though I was doing something that I knew was a pivot for my life, right? It was like, this was the first time. For anybody who knows, who can connect to saying I'm fine, I'm good, how hard it is when you say I'm not good, I'm not fine. So it's not hyperbolic right now for me to say that this was a life-changing event for me, right? It changed the trajectory of my life, my course, because I was finally able to say something that I had withheld for so long. And even though it was deeply emotional because in that moment, I still wanted the guy. I still was hoping that he would call me back and say, no, I do want to be with you, right? Like there was a part of me that was still kind of invested in that outcome for a short period of time. But this was probably the most significant moment for me to actually say, oh, there's a lot that I've skipped over and I need to go back and I need to actually connect to myself in ways that I had never done before. And so I know that this is a long,
I love this.
question,
I love it.
but it's like I started to do origin healing work without having a name for it, right? Without realizing what I was doing.
Flashcards on your fridge. Wait, so before you made the call, are you recognizing I'm making this call because there's stuff I have to work on? Or are you making the call on the ground crying and being like, oh, there's work to be done? And I'm asking this because this is how I process information. Sometimes I know before or I can intellectualize it and be like, I'll deal with the emotion later. And sometimes it's not until I'm in the shower crying, nothing even matters, that I know that there's work to be done.
It was definitely intellectualized first because you have to understand that I didn't know how to feel. I had really pushed that aside for so long. I didn't know how to feel
anything.
I could feel other people's sadness or I could feel others stuff, right? Like I could maybe cry in a movie or something like that, certainly. But
was it cathartic to cry in a movie? Like I use Grey's Anatomy as emotional porn. Yeah. Like when I need to cry, I'm like, let me listen to Meredith. It'll get it going.
That'll let the stream starts to flow. Yeah, I think in some ways, but it wasn't conscious for me. Like maybe it is for you. And so it was intellectualized first. And again, to feel it was too scary for so long, right? To like actually allow myself to make contact with that was like, oh no, there's no room here for that. There's no room here. And you don't know that you can trust that the adults in your life are going to be able to have space for that, capacity for that, because they were juggling so much. They were trying to keep their heads afloat too.
It makes me think about the beginning of your book of you in the closet.
Yeah.
And being like, how do I fix this? How do I fix this?
How do I fix this? And it's interesting because that moment in the closet, I am thinking about them and not about me. How do I make sure that both of you are okay? That both of you feel like my loyalty is with you, that you feel my love and my connection and that I'm here, right? And it's not about like, wait, what's this experience like for a 5-year-old, for a 6-year-old? Right? Like what's actually going on for me? And so I got so good at caring about other people's experiences, which there's a skill set there. There's a quote in the book that's from a colleague of mine, Dr. Alexandra Solomon, where she says, our gifts and our pain or our wounds are next door neighbors. And I think that that's, that does encapsulate it so well, is that our gifts do come through our survival in many ways. And some people, that's a trauma response. Yeah, it's still, there's a gift there. I have become an incredible therapist because I watched, I observed, I saw, I tuned into other people's experiences and I tracked that over and over and over again. I also became exceptional at listening to people's stories and knowing what, quote unquote, truth is, because I had a father who was a master manipulator. And my mom was someone who could not keep track and could not follow up. And I saw what that created in her. And so I was someone who observed and watched every little thing he said, every little thing he did, so I could know what was true and what was not true. I picked up the phone upstairs when they were fighting so I could understand and listen in and know what actually happened, because I knew I wasn't going to actually get the full story, maybe from either of them, right? So it's like those things, they're awful to think about a little human, right, having to go through things like that. And yet, right, there's a skill set that comes from it. And so I think part of our work, though, is to not be motivated by our pain anymore, to be motivated by our healing. A lot of times people are so afraid that if you heal, you're going to lose your gift. You're not going to lose your gift.
Your edge is going nowhere.
Your edge is going nowhere. You still got it. You still got it. But I think that can sometimes be something that's really scary for people, where they're like, what's going to happen? Because this is the thing that I became this person because of this. And that's also something that keeps people from honoring and naming what their experiences are. I wouldn't be who I am without the story. Totally. I got it. You're right. You wouldn't be who you are today without the story. But it does not mean that we don't name what happened in the story and connect to what your experience was, because there's some important stuff there that probably needs some attention and processing.
So at what point do you start to give it the name origin story and start to do the work. You have your realization that work is to be done.
Yeah.
How do you start creating tools for that?
My background is in family system work. And so I've always been trained in understanding the systems that we grew up in. And obviously there's things that happen along the way that happen in our teen years, that happen in our young adult life, that happened 2 weeks ago, right? That impact us and can be the first time that we actually experience something significant that shapes something within us, right? But we also know that our family systems and when we're kiddos is where so much of that happens. So it's not to say that other stuff doesn't matter. It does. But my work is looking at the family of origin, right? It's looking at the people, the adults in our lives, siblings if you had them. Sometimes it's, the aunt, the uncle, the cousin, the grandparent who lived with you, the step parent who came in. For some people, it's even the neighbors next door. I had clients who would go after school to the neighbor's home from 3 p.m. until 10 p.m. until, mom came home. And it's like, you have to look at that family system too, because you were spending a lot of hours there, having meals, interacting, et cetera, et cetera. So we like to look at the family system. And so for me, it was like the first time we came face to face with questioning our worth, questioning our sense of belonging, questioning how much of a priority we are to other people, to the important people in our lives, questioning trust and questioning our safety, our security in the world. And so when I say origin, right, to me, it's like, that first experience. And sometimes it's hard for us to connect to the first experience. We might not have all of the memories. We might not be able to access it. But for me, it's like looking at the first time that thing set something in motion for us. That has been a challenge for us, probably still to this day for many people.
But look, I've been to therapy for a long time. And the way that you speak, the way that you process information, the way that you ask questions is different than most therapists I come across. Why do you think you are so successful in that capacity? What makes you different?
I mean, I'm curious to hear what you think is different about it. But I think one of the things that I do is, one, I speak the language of who's in front of me as opposed to trying to get them to fit into some box of mine. So I sort of adapt in that way to make sure that I'm, connecting with the person who's in front of me in their way. I also think that this is feedback that I've gotten from other people that I think maybe is worth sharing, which is that I do try to hold compassion and grace for everyone. And when I say compassion and grace, it's not excuse making, but I think people appreciate that I'm not just sitting here saying, screw them. That there is a gentle way for me to pull you into your own accountability and your own responsibility and your own ownership, while also having grace and compassion for you and grace and compassion for whoever that person is over there. And I think I weave that in a way that makes it workable for people. I think a lot of times in therapy, it can either be you just as the therapist joining with your client and almost overly joining, like anything you say is gold. Yes, let me validate you. Yes, 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 affirm you. Yes, 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 more validation, sprinkle that in. And then I just don't know how much growth can happen from that place. And it's a
bagel.
Not much. Zero. To me, therapy is an art form. And I think most therapists have the science part down. You went to school, you understand, got it. The art form is the thing that I do well. And I think, maybe that's hard to put into words, right? Like what that is. I think I string words together and create sentences that somehow land for people and make people look somewhere that they wouldn't otherwise look. I think that people do feel seen and heard and understood and cared for by me. And so when you get to that point in the relationship, then you can challenge people. And that's the beauty of safety. And it's the beauty of trust, is that when you establish it, whether that takes weeks or months, or for some people even years, right? But when you do that, then I can ask you to look at something that you would have denied or rejected or found a way out of looking at before.
Were you in a leadership role when you played sports?
Yeah, I was captain.
Shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. a concert master of my orchestra, you know.
Because you have to adapt to every athlete, and the best way to help an athlete is to meet them where they are and coach them to where they can be. And I think I've come across therapists who don't meet me where I am. They tell me where I am is not right. Or
where
how
you
I'm
should be
presenting or
going.
any of those things right. Yeah. Or you're too smart. Thank you for creating another insecurity. You're too masculine. Great. Keep adding it on. What else do you want to say I'm too much of? So I think I tend to look for therapists now, and we had this conversation, and for the record, she's not my therapist, she's my friend, but I do talk to her about finding therapists, is that finding support where their background is in sports. Yeah. Because I feel safer in that capacity and more understood.
I'm going to say one more thing that I think is important in the therapeutic world, which is that we make sense in context. Two, our behavior, any of our behaviors, they serve a function. They're protecting something always, right? So the things that we hate about ourselves, the things that we can't stand, the thing that we judge, oh my gosh, I'm so this, I'm so that, whether I gossip too much, I'm too judgmental, I'm the level of conflict, you know, in my life, I can't believe I get so loud or I can't do this, whatever it is, that is something I see as self-protective. And I think when you can get people to stop being so at odds with themselves, right? It's like, I hate this. Let's understand this. Hold on, pull back for a second. You are protecting yourself, right? And so like when we hate parts of ourselves, and then we don't know how to touch them, we don't know how to be with those parts, right? Like then there's a block. But I think that for me, when I try to get people to see that their behavior is actually protecting them from something, that their behavior is actually serving something that came, like it all makes sense if we can just connect the dots. And once you can make sense of something, then you can be gentler with it, right? Then you can approach it in a different way than the way that you've been approaching it before. So maybe those are some of the things that, you know, maybe are a little bit different than.
Yeah, a softer landing. The thing I like about you as a friend is you come across as a very strong, very clear, very compassionate friend, not as a friend who's also a therapist, because you don't bring the, because I have some friends who are therapists, and I'm like, you're not at work right now. Like, please turn it off, because I feel super patronized in this conversation. And so I think, you know, whether you're that way in your practice as well, but you do know how to balance it. You do know where the line is in the way that you show up. Could you quickly go through the origins that you've identified in the book? And what was interesting when I was listening to it, you know how like when you're watching Friends, you identify a little bit with every character. I'm like, yep.
I've had many people ask if it's concerning if you have all five. The answer is no. It is absolutely possible to have all five and to connect with each of them in some way or another. Likely there's going to be, you know, one or two that maybe stand out more significantly. And there might be some where you're like, that's not for me, but we don't skip over those chapters. Want to know why? Because it's with your partner, it's your parent, it's your child, it's your best friend. You know, like that's the beauty of this is like, oh no, that's not about me. I've never struggled with feeling like a priority. And it's like, how about your partner? You know, like how about your sibling? How about your friend who had that strong reaction that you didn't understand about? It's like part of this book is to, yes, of course, read it for you to understand your own self, but also we're reading relationally, right? Like this is about
such a holistic view. It's how I look at nutrition. It's not independent of your sleep, of your stretching, of your exercise, of your mental health. And you're framing it in that way too, where it's almost like, I don't know if I'd be a great therapist, but I'm a great counselor. I don't know if I'd be a great therapist. It's almost like, let's get you past the point of being defensive when you say no, so we can find out who in that area has that wound, to then create an ecosystem of coming together and healing. And I'll bring this up later about people who read something like this and get stuck in the work and don't move past the work and then hide behind the work and weaponize the work with people around them. But for anyone that is listening, I would love for them to get to hear some of the origins and to see if it's like, oh, let me lean into this a little bit more.
Totally. A lot of people will lean into the worthiness wound. When I was writing, I was like, I started to really question. I was like, I think maybe every human rubs up against the worthiness wound at some point or another, right? So, okay, perfectionists, pleasers, peacekeepers, the comic relief out there, right? If that sounds like you, likely there's a bit of the worthiness wound in your life. And mostly because it revolves around conditional love in many ways, right? It's like my worth, my value is tied to my ability to perform, please, make you laugh, what, fill in the blank, right? Is that there's a condition to my desire for connection, closeness, love, attachment, peace, etc. And, if you grew up, okay, straight A's makes mom happy. Scoring a hat trick is what makes dad more present. Making my family laugh means that dad stops hurting my sister, right? Like you start, because kiddos are so observant, right? They're just tuned in, they're tapped in, they're not fully stripped of their intuition yet, right? And they're like, okay, I noticed that when I do X, here's what happens. And so, okay, if I keep doing this, then I'm going to keep getting the result, the ideal result that I would like, right? So when you become a perfectionist or a performer to some degree, right, then you're learning how to work that system and get the things that you want. But also, it can come from statements of harm, right? Like sometimes people just grow up with the adults in their lives truly telling them that they're unworthy, that you have no value, right? It's like, it's abusive, and we talk about that in the safety chapter as well. But sometimes it can be that explicit, but other times it's more in the subtleties, and more times than not, I think it actually happens in the subtleties of conditional love. I remember I have a worthiness wound, and I think I shared this in the book about with my dad. When I was easygoing, he was so present, so helpful, so connective, like would go above and beyond for me. When I was challenging, and when I say challenging, I really mean, like I say it so loosely, like I was a teenager, I wasn't doing lots of bad stuff. I was like pretty on the straight line for the majority of the time. But when I was challenging and like a little defiant, maybe saying no to him or having a boundary with him, that's when I would get love withheld, and it was through silent treatment, right? And his silent treatment would be days or weeks on end. And in that I learned, okay, if you're easygoing, like then you get connection and love, right? If you're difficult, i.e. like you have feelings, you express yourself, you're not okay with something, right? And that piles on to obviously my childhood story too. That's just reiterated here in my teenage years, right? It's like, if you do that, then love is withheld, right? And there was a fear there that got instilled that if you're difficult, right, then people will leave. And whether it means that they're going to leave by giving you the silent treatment or it means that they're going to end the relationship, it doesn't matter, right? It's like people will leave you. And so it's like, okay, be unaffected, be the cool girl. That was a persona that I had embodied for many years, and, continue to just like flow and be easy. Nothing bothers me. I'm cool. I'm good. Right. And so again, there's the worth is like your worth is tied to your easygoingness. Right. So, we look for where our worth is challenged, where our worth is connected. You have a question about it?
See, this is why I need Botox.
She's like, I've been revealed.
You can see my face going through.
My emotions are coming through now.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking of examples of behavior as an adult where it might not be so obvious that I'm behaving this way because of a worthiness wound, because I've already convinced myself I'm fine. So I'm thinking through like, what would that look like if you don't think you have that? And ways it could be.
Yeah, right.
Yourself.
Like one of the things that I talk about in the book is this sort of the path of repetition, which is like maybe the role repeats. So you had to be a perfectionist as a child, then you're an adult and you're still a perfectionist, or you're still a performer. You still feel like there's a condition for you being loved. But there's also the path of opposition. And we don't talk about that one as much. And, it's like I'll take a little detour here, but for example, if you had to be an emotional caretaker for a parent, right, you might be emotionally caretakered out. And so like, sure, you might take a path of repetition and always be that emotional caretaker for the people you love, the intimate relationships in your life. Or you might kind of swing the pendulum 180 the other way and really be pushed off by that, right? Where you actually don't want to have intimacy with people, where you don't want to connect in any way. And so I think it's like people will either repeat or they'll find the opposition to. So, okay, if we're talking about perfectionism, what's the opposite of that, right? And we don't need to label that. It could just be for anybody to think about, right? It's like, was I one thing and have I swung in an opposite direction in some way? Like, I don't want to show up for anybody.
I had someone say to me, it was during a recording, it was like an on-set thing, and we were bringing up things that need to get done the next day. It was a very benign conversation. And this person was immediately triggered and was like, I don't want to be responsible for anybody else, just out of nowhere. And I was like, whoa. I mean, we have something to film, so like we are responsible. But I could tell it was something, like, you let, in my mind, I was like, oh, he let somebody down at some point in his life and it really, really upset him or it hurt. And now he's like, I just don't want to be responsible for anyone because then I can't let anyone down. And I'm over here like, Mari, pathologizing someone who like you. But I was like, whoa, that was a really big response. I was like, all right, well, do you want some tea or something?
Right. Yeah. And beautiful that you can kind of tune into that. And also not your job to dissect
that's
it.
What my, of my many traumas, and I don't use the word lightly, I have to assess situations very fast to make if I'm safe.
Yes.
And it shows up in great ways in the way that I do my work with my clients and the way that I can read rooms and read plays and all those things. But it is exhausting. And it's not my job, but it's a default.
Right.
And sometimes I resent it because I do get burnt out. But I am very quick to be like, don't get angry at someone saying something like that. Let's quickly understand why they're saying that. And Mark actually pointed this, our friend Mark Rose pointed this out to me. I was telling him some story about my life and he's like, oh, that is when you realized that telling the truth hurts other people. This is when you realized you need to protect other people and that you got it. And I was like, Mark, you're not on the clock. I'm just telling you a story right now.
I'm not paying you anything.
I was doing the dishes and we were on FaceTime and I was like, that's really good, but I don't want to explore this right now because we're just catching up as friends.
I'm not ready.
But yes, it was me noticing him saying, the friend now that was on set, not wanting to be responsible for people made me feel like he didn't show up perfectly at least once in his life.
Absolutely possible. Or he's burnt out from showing up for everybody, you know? Right? And there's a lot of different paths that can lead us to the thing. And really with these words, they work as a framework. Other people are going to use a different word to make sense of their wound. You don't have to force yourself into any box. It's just a framework that helped me move through the book and organize something. And I also think what's important to say right now is that your story, even if it's the same thing that happened to the person next to you, right? Where you say, here are the details. Oh my gosh, me too. How it gets internalized can be different based on each individual person. So let's say a parent leaves, okay, when you're a few years old. One person might internalize that as a worthiness wound. You left because I'm not good enough for you to stay. Next person might internalize it as a trust wound, right? You left, I can't trust the most important people in my life to stick around and be here for me, right? So it's like, it's important that you don't get caught in.
So this is my overthinking. So the two different experiences, does that mean, so if someone goes to trust and someone else goes to worthiness, does it mean that maybe there was a wound before that happened that made them go to trust and worthiness?
No, not necessarily.
Welcome to the web in my mind.
The intricacy.
As I'm reading the book, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this, and this all apply. But did I have this response because of this response? And how do you figure out which one is the origin?
But that's it's interesting because you were alluding to this about maybe questions that you'll have further on in the interview. But when we get caught in the overthinking, it's a distraction actually away from just doing the healing work, right? And which is interesting.
Where's the button then?
Yeah, right? I know. Push, stop, right? But I think a lot of times people will get lost in trying to make the thing make so much sense, right? That that's where they spend all of their time and energy, as opposed to just like what feels true, what do you connect with? Right. And then let's slow into that and actually begin to process some of that. Or people will say, oh, I kept searching for the moment earlier. And I'm like, well, what's the moment you had? Well, I was 14. Great. Go there. Well, I'm looking for something maybe something at 5 didn't happen, right? So it's like people will go down this hunt. And I think that is one of the ways that people actually stay distracted and disconnected from actually continue to move forward with it.
I've started now, just where am I today? And what memory does today bring up?
Yeah.
And then the next session is where am I today? And what memory does that bring up? Because of my compounded complex, multiple traumas over my lifetime. And then just constant, it's always level 10. It's been level 10 since I was a kid. So when I do sit across from a therapist, I'm like, are you ready? Like, buckle. Do you need some tea? I'm like almost preparing
There's the caretaking.
Right. And
can you handle this though? Right. I think a lot of people really do want to know, can you handle what my stuff is? Right. And you need to know that people can handle it, right? In order to actually go there with someone.
Or like I said, it's important for me to understand not every therapist is going to be able to handle all of it, but they might be champs at handling a part of it.
Yeah.
And not feeling like I can't trust anybody because you can't take on all of it type of thing.
Right.
Which part of it does still put me in the seat of caretaking in some ways, but it's also, I think, that's something I just have to accept. But worthiness.
Yes, keep going. Okay. So the next one is belonging. And a lot, a lot of families will sort of have this air about them. Do as we say, do as we think, as we believe, right? Like be like us, otherwise you're out. Right? And sometimes it's explicit. And other times, again, it's sort of in this like implicit way, you pick up on it. And it's this sense of, it's when you're a kid, right? Like all you want is to fit in, right? And fitting in is very different than belonging, but they're synonymous in the way that most people think about it. And we trade, this chapter is very important because I think most people can resonate with this on some level, is that there's a point in our lives where we do often trade our authenticity, right? Who we are, connection to capital S self, right? We trade our authenticity for what we perceive as being chosen or, connection or love. And again, when we look at our childhoods, Dr. Gabor Mate talks about this, right? Where he'll say, like, if attachment and authenticity are both threatened in a family system, right, then the child is always going to choose attachment because we have to, right? It's survival. It's the food, it's the shelter, it's all of those things. And so we disconnect from authenticity right away in order to survive, to live. That might sound extreme, and there are certainly scenarios and cases where it can be deep, very extreme, but then it's also in these subtle ways too, right? Is like, wear your hair up and not down. Otherwise, we're not leaving. It's got to look this way. This is real stuff, right? Like this stuff happens where it's like, even in just like how I want to dress, who I want to love, whatever it might be, right? It's like, if I'm not doing it the way that you want me to do it, or the way that you say is okay for me to do it, then I'm on the outside, right? And listen, belonging can get challenged in a lot of ways outside of a family system. I talk about that in the book too. But if we're just looking at the family system, right, we're often looking at this trait of, authenticity for attachment and love and connection. Who do I need to be in order to be connected and close to you, right? And I will trade in myself in order to do that, because that is the greatest lifeline.
Belonging is really prevalent for children of immigrants. We don't know where we belong.
Totally. Where am I?
Too American to be this way, to this way to be American, whatever the country of origin is. And then it's, especially if you grew up in a religious home, I look mixed race, I always feel othered.
Yeah.
And I've somehow turned that into a superpower, but I commiserate a lot with my friends who are mixed race or children of immigrants. We don't know where to belong. We don't know how to make everybody happy.
Yep.
And some of us choose to pick a side, and then some of us try to choose how to make ourselves happy.
And it's never enough, right? In either one.
And then for me, played individual sports. I mean, I played team sports and then I was sticking with tennis. And then I was taken out of class for speech therapy, but also for gait. And so I never got to like fit in anywhere. And so for me, I'm constantly trying to create an environment where I can create belonging as me as being the nebulous. And still to this day, I tell my friends I'm too Egyptian to be American, too American to be Egyptian. And now with the words feminine and masculine being thrown around, I'm to this, to that.
Right.
It's such an interesting one that I'm curious, not in the session with my therapist, to explore, to sort out. Because the thing I've landed on is I told somebody that I was dating that I'm always concerned about being novel. I'm novelty. And this person wrote an article for 500,000 people to read about it. I was like, oh, that's awesome. Don't date an author. But over time, I sat with this idea of not belonging and not fitting in and made it something positive where I was like, I don't fit in any one where because I belong everywhere. And if I am quote unquote novel, when you have a novel painting on your wall, you don't stick just any other painting next to it. You wait for an equally novel painting to put next to it. So I've found ways to just accept that I don't really belong anywhere.
Yeah.
But what does that even mean?
But the reframe, right, of like my differences are novelty to someone. And yet that's what a deep struggle for so many, right? Is like differences are really hard because most people are not taught how to integrate differences and to accept differences and love differences, right? Differences are seen as a negative. And especially again, when you're growing up that way as a little kiddo or your parents, you know, they look different, they sound different, they cook different than all your friends, whatever it is, right? It's like, that's a deeply confronting thing for a kiddo.
Growing up with my mom making all my clothes and my mom, great sense of style. It's European Mediterranean style, and going to school with the cutest dress and the cutest beret and being made fun of with my falafels. And so you see the photos of me, the class photos of me looking so cute and so adorable. And then when I could decide what I was going to wear, becoming quote unquote Americanized, I'm like, man, I never should have let that go. I was like a real handsome kid, but it's, I'm like mad at myself. You should have known better. But it's this idea of belonging. I forget who said it. It's a funny quote though. You're so unique, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think that being different, I think if everyone leaned into the fact that they were different.
I know.
Because we all are.
So much, it would be a lot easier for a lot of people. But yeah, the social pressure, right? It's even that, right? And again, I talk about that in the book as well. And I don't just limit it to the family of origin, because I think especially with belonging, right? So much of that pressure is like, well, I just want to be like, you know, the kids at school because I don't want to feel othered and I don't want to be made fun of, right? And so I need to get further away from my Egyptian culture. I don't want to bring falafel to school anymore, right? Like just give me a ham sandwich, you know, like keep it simple.
No,
right?
it was a Lunchable. Like just give me a Lunchable.
Just, come on, Mom, please. Like don't embarrass me.
Which for me, when I started to eat the school lunches to belong, I started to get sick.
Yes.
Because of celiac, didn't know it. I'm eating horrible school lunches. And I wasn't when I was just eating my Mediterranean food.
Yeah.
Like
all the things we see after the fact. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Prioritization. Pretty straightforward. When you didn't feel like you were important to the very important people in your life. A lot of times this happens when the adults in your life are, you know, maybe they're a workaholic, maybe there's addiction in the family, maybe there is a sibling who has mental health challenges and all of their attention is going to that sibling instead of you. There's a lot of different scenarios in which, you know, you can feel deprioritized. Maybe there's a divorce and the conflict is the priority. Maybe there's a parent who's starting to date again and they're obsessed with dating and you're like, wait, where am I? I always, in this wound though, I always like to say that our wounds don't all have to come from malintended places, right? And I share a story Andre, that's his alias in the book, of a client of mine who had a single mama, and he loved and respected her so deeply. And in our session, over and over and over again, like she was working, multiple jobs, doubles every day, except on Sundays. They would go to church together on Sundays, then have brunch together afterwards. And that was their time together before she went to her shift on Sunday. And he would sit there in session. He's like, no, she's doing everything in her life to prioritize me, right? To give me the best opportunity, opportunities that she didn't have, right? And so he could really intellectualize this. And what we had to get to was still that he had a deep desire to be prioritized through time spent. He missed her. He wanted her to be around. And I think this is such an important example because we can rationalize things. We can understand what they were doing, why they were doing it. We can have gratitude and appreciation for it. Thank you so much for working so hard. And we still need to connect to our emotion about it, right? Because otherwise, if we don't, it comes along with us into our adult lives, into our patterns, right? All of these things that keep playing out over and over and over again. Why can't I prioritize other people? Why do I spend all of my time playing video games instead of connecting with my partner? Why, right? All of these things that can happen from these wounds, right? So again, not everything has to come from this awful, traumatic, hateful, malintended place, right? A lot of times it actually comes from the adults, of course, doing the best that they can, giving it everything that they've got and still missing the mark. But if we are constantly protecting them and the story, then we're not going to be able to make contact with our pain.
So, Andre, what was the path to get to that being the thing? Because he's coming in and it's like seeming's really, really benign. Like, what is it?
Partner is complaining about him deprioritizing her.
Oh, okay.
And that's it, right? Is like to see what the thing in the present day moment is calling for. And sometimes it's, I don't feel prioritized again because I didn't feel. Sometimes it's us creating the dynamic in our relationships. Right? I mean, again, it can show up in endless ways. But yeah, most of the time people are coming in with a presenting problem that's happening in their lives right now that maybe doesn't look like anything you'd expect it to be. Right?
Does anyone ever come in with a friend and be like, tell her what's wrong with me?
So not often, although I have had a couple of friend sessions where it's more not them coming in for therapy and consistently, but like a friend maybe makes a guest appearance. Yeah. Or I've given assignments, before where I'm like, I want you to ask 4 friends to, write something about, right? Because the perspective can be very
so powerful,
helpful,
right?
Yes.
I often feel misunderstood. And then I have a couple friends who do understand me really well. I love the fact that they've taken the time to understand the way I process information. And so it's sometimes they'll be around. I was like, how did I come across? And they're like, I know what you meant, but it comes across this way to everyone else. I was like, thank you so much. So like, it's almost like I'm already thinking like, I need to bring someone into therapy. Be like, tell her what I did.
Tell her what you see. Okay. The trust wound is where there's a rupture in trust, right? And a lot of times that's trust with other. We're also looking at trust with self, right? Our connection to intuition. So deceits, betrayals, lies, the big stuff, obviously, when we think about trust might be, an infidelity in a family system. It might be someone gambling away, a child's education fund. It might be a parent taking out credit cards in, a 7-year-old's name, things like that maybe feel very extreme. All real things that happen or that have happened.
Don't they do a credit check on the what?
She said, I don't understand this. Yes. She said, help me understand. People can go to lengths to cheat things and to some of the more subtle stuff, like a promise over and over and over again that just doesn't get kept. Not showing up to pick somebody up from school. Saying we're going to go do this and consistently, being inconsistent with your word. And again, reminders. I'm not talking about like mom got caught up at work one day and missed your soccer game. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about like these kind of consistent, persistent things that chip away at our relationship with trust, right? Can I believe you? Can I believe what you're telling me? And so sometimes it is the sort of extreme cases, but other times it's in the like the smaller, more subtle stuff. I think trust with self is such a big one. Whenever people say like, how am I going to ever restore trust with another? My answer is always that you have to restore trust with self first. Always, 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 always. Humans don't come with guarantees. When there is a rupture in trust, it's one of the hardest things to come back from. It really is. It's so, so, so challenging. And yet there still is a way to do it, but it's not sort of this, promise me you'll never do that again. Promise me you'll do, right? It's a day in, day out type of a thing that we do. There's a quote from Ernest Hemingway that I really love about trust. Best way to know if you can trust someone is to trust someone. Right?
I love that quote
it's
too.
Such a powerful one. It's so simple and yet so deeply profound, right? Because the alternative doesn't get you to trust. Not trusting people does not get you to trust. But this is not an invitation for reckless trust. It's an eyes wide open trust, right? And it's us reconnecting to our intuition. So much strips us from it. And I was saying this earlier at one point where it's like, you have parents who tell you what you're feeling isn't what you're feeling, what you're seeing isn't what you're seeing, all because they're trying to protect you from something. Mom comes home drunk. You ask as a kiddo, what is mommy sick? No, mommy's just tired. Or like, they make up something. And it's like these things that take us a little further away from our sense that something is wrong or something's not right, right? And when you do that over and over and over again, even though they think that they're protecting you from whatever, the hard truth, the things that are not age appropriate, this, that, and the other, it's actually taking people further away from self. And so a lot of times this restoration of trust with other is actually a restoration of trust with the self so that you can discern in every moment if this is something that actually feels like a trusting exchange or not.
It makes it less scary too when you go in that way.
Yes, because the other it feels impossible. But how do I know? How do I know? How do I know? Right? And, there might always be some question marks. How do we know? Well, we don't, but we can start to connect more to the sensations in our bodies. And again, that doesn't mean it's 100%, of course, but we can start to like feel into and just tune into and pay attention to these things and hopefully build a relationship with someone who is showing up honestly.
I always say doubting a circumstance is okay. Doubting yourself.
Yeah.
Never.
No. And so many of us are walking around not deeply connected with self and not able to trust self. And then the last one is safety, which is a particularly
check.
Yeah. This and check for me too. The worthiness and safety are the ones that really are big for me. This is a gentle approach chapter because when we're talking about the absence of safety, we're often talking about the presence of abuse. A lot of trauma can be here. And so we have to talk about those things, which I do in the chapter, but also like recklessness and negligence. Right? It's this idea as a kiddo that you did not feel like your kind of system was safe and secure and thought after and protected and considered, right? And when there's ruptures in that, and trust and safety often go very hand in hand. It's uncommon to like not have issues with trust and have issues with safety or vice versa. Both will create hypervigilance out of people, right? Because that's the way that we scan the environments. You were saying that before, and making sure everything is okay. And just that's our way of protection. But we are often, right, in this hypervigilant state, making sure that, the people around us and the environment is okay. Yeah.
Approaching origin work, how heavy can it be? And I'm asking this from the intent of most people that listen to my podcast are high performers. And there is no time off, time to process. And sometimes starting to do this work can be scary from the sense of I want to do this work, but I can't blow up my life, or I have to show up to the game, or I have to show up for the team.
Yeah.
And is there a softer way to start playing with this? Or do you really say like carve out the time?
I understand this question. And I do think it can be hard when you know that there's like a high stakes where you have to go perform. And if your mind is somewhere else, or, you're in a lot of your sadness, right? It's like, how is that going to affect your performance? And, it might not. it's hard to say whether it's going to deeply affect it or not, but I understand like carving out time where you feel like you can actually give something its full attention. And so in some ways I think, I've heard people say, I just finished reading your book. I picked it up. I started reading 6 months ago. Beautiful, right? There's something about pacing yourself. And I actually don't suggest anyone read this book or like try to work through it in a week. You know what I mean? Like,
don't listen to it while you're cooking for clients.
No, but I think listening to, that I think is okay because there's like a storytelling, there is something that's captivating about it.
One, you're reading yourself, which I love when authors do that. And you read it with such emotion with it too. It's beautiful. But if you're like me, you're processing while you're listening.
Right. And you have to pause. And you said, where you're like, whoa, what came up for me right then? So back to your question, I think what I would say is probably not when it's super high stakes. Like if you're going for a championship game, just chill. just like wait till after. It's okay. Right.
You're at the free throw line. Like,
this memory is coming in, you botch it. Like, let's not do that. Right. Take a beat, take a moment. But off season, again, but you do have to carve out some time. Like get intentional with it. And if you need to pause, right? Come back. Or if it feels actually okay to do a little trial and error, like let me see. This isn't a high stakes moment in my life. So let me see if I feel into this. What does my performance look like after that? Can I still give the presentation? Can I still make a free throw? Can I what's going to happen here? And again, if the stakes are low, you don't need to test this out in your most important moments of your life, obviously. But also remember, like this is some of the most important moments of your life too. Yeah. And I think when we start placing things as like, well, all this other stuff is what is most important, I would maybe challenge that. Again, I think the timing of that is okay. Put things aside if you have something really important going on, but also like, there's not much that I could say is more important than resolving this, for the quality of your relationships and the quality of your life. Like performers, they find a way to succeed and achieve incredible, right? You can sort of circumvent some of this stuff. But when you pull it back and you get into your interpersonal relationships, the other things that are happening in your life, right? Like that's what's calling for your attention, right? So yeah, I would say get intentional with it. Try to set aside some time, maybe test it out and see, okay, if I feel into this, like, what's it like to go to dinner afterward? What's it like to be around people? Can I do that? Can I not do that? Does it improve how I'm playing? Does it not? I've had moments where I'm like, oh, damn, I felt into this deeply. And then all of a sudden I give the best performance of my life. You know what I mean? And like, I don't know what the research is on that. Like, is this the next book? Right. But like you have to just test some of this out and give yourself the opportunity to see where it's going to take you.
And if someone's using the book to approach this or trying to find a therapist to do work with, what are the good things to look for in a therapist?
Yeah. I'm biased because I think that systems work is so important. Right. So it's like, I do want a therapist who understands family systems and is, exploring that with me and has, that art and science form that I was talking about before. Like I'm looking for that.
Is that the word that they use? Is family systems a common word? Because I had not heard that before you or your colleague.
Yeah. Yeah. Family
and I've
systems.
been in therapy since I was 20.
Right. Because it's like, we're not just looking at what's happening in your life right now. A lot of people will look at what's happening in your life right now and like, how do we solve that? We're looking at what's happened in your life before that hasn't been tended to, which is why what's happening in your life right now is happening. What I always say is that, the unwanted patterns in our lives today are pointing to us to the irresolution from pain from the past that just hasn't been tended to properly. Pain is interesting. Like, it's not out to get us. It's not out to destroy our lives. It's not cynically rubbing its hands together like, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to bring this person into your life just to show you the pattern again, right? It's like pain, when we're younger, we do just survive. We get to the other side. We white knuckle our way through. But we don't, at 7, think like, I should probably grieve. I should probably witness this pain a little bit more, right? And so there's this idea of just moving on and getting on with life doesn't vibe with pain. Pain's like, well, No.
You know Michael White?
Yeah.
A true well-felt pain can be just as generous as a true well-felt joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one that stuck with me for a while.
Yeah. Right. It's like pain wants you to just spend some time with it. And then it will release its grip on you. It does, right? Like I think if it could speak, right, that's what it would say to us is like, I actually really don't want to destroy you, right? Like I don't want to have a grip on you, but if you keep turning away from me, I have to find clever ways to bring you back into contact with me because you can't just move on with life. Like I need to be seen. You need to just take a beat with me. You just need to honor me for a moment. And then okay, we can go on our merry way. It's like we can move on from this, but you have to turn back around. And so for me, I think, looking for a therapist, I want to look for someone who thinks similarly, right? Who's like, I see the full picture. I'm not just trying to solve, the thing in the moment. I'm looking at your whole life and I want to identify some of this. And I think honestly, so much of it, we know that the alliance, meaning our connection, right, is the number one thing that will determine sort of the outcome of your therapy. And so really like, do I enjoy speaking with this person? Do I feel connected to you? Do I vibe with you? Is this good? I want to keep showing up here. Do I feel like I can be honest with you? Right. And that's not like day one, but I think weeks, months in, am I withholding things from you? Am I lying to you? Am I not telling you everything about what's going on? Like, do I actually feel safe and can I trust you? And again, that takes some time to establish. So you don't want to just go in once unless it's terrible and you have a clarity about that. But you want to give a therapist a little bit of time to see if trust and safety really can be established because ultimately, at the end of the day, that person's going to be pointing you to things that are a little hard, that are like a little confronting to look at. But yeah, the relationship, like if you feel like you could chat with that person over and over and over again, and you feel like they get you, right? They understand you, right? That's going to be such a huge part of it.
What do you not like about your industry?
Now that the industry is in the public eye in so many ways, meaning like social media, et cetera, I think there's a lot of people who maybe don't have as much of a complete understanding or sort of integrated understanding of things that post and speak from a place of authority that maybe can be more hurtful, harmful, potentially. And I don't want it to sound dramatic, but like could be destructive, right? It's like if you're putting out certain messages and you're presenting them as people do look for authority figures in this space. And so I think there's a looseness to that, which can get a little tricky. I think we've gotten into the habit of over-labeling things. We were talking about this before, where we're pathologizing people that we don't know. It's like, is this person this? Like fill in whatever label.
Right.
And you're
I
like,
was calling it the pop psychology. Like a disagreement is not trauma or attack. It's you being uncomfortable is not a trigger. Speaking in a certain way, like sounding like HR does not mean that you're a self-aware person was one of the ones that I saw. And it's really noisy.
Yeah, it's noisy. And I think we jump to conclusions so much. And we like therapists know, even people who can diagnose, it's like it could take months for someone to actually diagnose something like narcissism, right? To like really know if it actually is or isn't, right? And yet a straight, like one thing had somebody cheated, somebody lied, and all of a sudden, this is what this person is. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's loose. I don't know if that's a problem of the field itself or if it's just sort of what happens in the social media world and it just kind of unravels from there. I think, one of the things that I don't like is how limited we are in working with state licensures. So I can only work with people who live in the state of New York because that's where I'm licensed. And although I understand why in certain scenarios it would be important to have a clinician who is close by someone who's maybe struggling in a significant way, the reality of it is that most of the time people are wanting to just connect with a therapist,
the right person
who's across state lines. And there's nothing terrible going on in their lives. They're not in harm's way. They just want to connect with that person that they really get on with, you know, and feel like would be a good fit for them. And so I think there's some like limitations there that.
As a therapist, can you ever bill as a coach? Or because you're a therapist, you have to bill as a therapist?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that a lot of times this line can get a little bit tricky because I do know it's like people be like, well, I'm a coach for these states or
like whatever. Yeah.
Yes. And you know, you're the same person. You're not like all of a sudden your framework just shifted and like I'm using only coaching.
Lawyers want to get creative. We can get creative too.
But so people do get creative. Absolutely.
Because it is disappointing when you find someone that is like, you're who I want to talk to.
Yes. And I think better training, like, and this is probably true in any industry, but I think there's a way that we can support clinicians to improve their art form more, right? It's like there's too many people who I think are not as great as they could be, right? And that is something that I think like that maybe the education system to some degree is limiting and doesn't prepare people. Oh, and I'll have to give you another one. What they think what we can earn. But you don't want to get me started on that.
I do though.
When I graduated in 2009 from my graduate work, and I remember in a year or two later, they sent a survey with however many questions, and one was asking what we were earning. I don't know if it was a few years later, 5 years later, maybe something like 5 years later, so that they could give the data, right, for incoming students of like 5 years out from graduate school, you can be earning X. And I remember there were 5 options, and it was 25 to 30, 30 to 35, 35 to 40, 40 to 45, 45 and above. And I was so pissed. I was so heated because the narrative was like, you didn't get into this field to make money. Over and over and over and over again. You didn't get into this field to make money. You didn't get into this field to make money. It was like, sure. Like, yeah, we're here, of course, doing beautiful work with people. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. Like, let's get on with, right? It's like outside of the box, please.
Right.
Like, let us find the incredible ways in which we can support, show up for people, do incredible work, but also like stop limiting clinicians because we need so many more therapists in the world. There's not enough of us to go around for the people who need us. We know we are outnumbered by the people who could use our support. And especially if you're talking about exceptional clinicians, right? So this idea that you're going to bring in amazing people, but your options are 25 to 30, 30 to 35, and so on is not super compelling, right? And so I think there's that too, which is like, no, this field, and there's a lot of people who've obviously cracked through that and I think have shown that you can be exceptional at this work and you can also live a really lovely life. But I think there was such a big limitation there for a long period of time and, didn't make it super interesting for people to maybe want to get into this work too, because that's a hard way to live if that's where you're at.
Can schooling in that capacity stay current in the same way that nutrition has studies that bring things up to date? Like, what does that look like?
Will you say a little bit more?
Yeah. So nutrition school. If you take nutrition in college, it's sorely outdated.
Yeah.
Some more specialized schools are getting better at looking at current studies and data like that. When it comes to the work in therapy, is the education around it pretty much from the book in 1960 hasn't been updated type of thing?
No, I think there are some updates. And I honestly think in many ways social media has done some beautiful stuff for showing people that they can become entrepreneurs and they can create a business out of something that maybe wasn't available, 10 years ago. So yes. And I think that the courses that they're offering and maybe showing like how to start your own practice or how to do some of those things are being embedded. So yeah, there's definitely expansion in the field in that way, but I still think we could go quite a bit further.
In what area particularly?
Probably in empowering people actually to like build something and yeah, I mean, I get heated about this topic just because I felt so limited. So I don't mean to like belabor the point about, the financial component of it, but I think that like around
if you're financially stressed out, I don't need you helping me. We got to go help you first so then you can help me.
Yeah, but it's so true, right? It's like to be in this disempowered space financially. I mean, it was crazy when I came out of grad school. I went to work for a private practice and I was living in New Jersey, commuting into New York at the time. And I was living at home. I was working 6 jobs total. Okay. Hustling, all this. I would take the train into New York. At the time, it was like $17.50 for a round trip ticket.
That seems high at the time, really?
Yeah. For a round trip. Yeah, get in, gotta come back.
I mean,
no, it's a lot more now.
That's like 20 tacos.
There's a lot you could do with that much. So I'm coming in, doing that. I grab a coffee. I show up for my one client. My one client no shows. It was costing me money to go to work for months. And it was like, there was a point where I really thought about stopping. And I was like, maybe I'll just coach lacrosse, like maybe I'll go do that. And I really looked into it. And I think that's like, to me, that it does feel near to my heart because I think we are put in these disempowered positions and you're put, and of course I chose to work for a private practice because that's what I wanted, like where I wanted to learn. And I could have gone to an agency job making $30,000 a year, seeing, 30 people a week, something ridiculous. And I was making $35 a session at the time when I was working for the private practice. And yeah, I was so close to quitting. I really was. I was so close to quitting and I was so close to giving up on it. And I'm so glad I stuck with it, obviously. But yeah, it was, and I think there's so many people who arrive at that point. And that's the thing that makes me sad is that you can be so good at this work, but because there's no way to survive,
What's the tipping point that makes you stick with it?
Getting clients.
Just getting more clients, fixing the problem financially.
Right. Getting more. And listen, I was working as a waitress like 5 days a week. I was coaching high school lacrosse. I was giving private lessons. I was running a women's lacrosse league. I was doing a lot of stuff. And so I was busy and I did have enough money to like survive, right, and get by. But man,
it's hard.
It's hard because if you're not juggling 6 jobs, you're not surviving.
Yeah. I have washed cars. I've been a bar back. I babysat. I fixed computers.
Substitute teaching. I was doing it all.
Yeah. I want to, and I'm not actually sure how to like broach the topic, but you and I have talked about the labels of masculine and feminine, and we were commiserating because I was telling you how hard it was for me to find a therapist and how difficult sometimes it is for me to navigate outside of the sports world and outside of the corporate world, because I am told by many self-help people, and one was a notable women's empowerment coach, that I am too masculine and that I would be so much more successful if I used words that were softer than dominate and conquest and crush it. And that's actually the origin of Eat, Play, Crush. Is I was trying to come up with, what do I do? Well, I eat clean and I play hard. And my friend's like, well, you crush life. Like, that's what you do. I'm like, yeah, but everyone says it's like too masculine. And then this woman posted this and I was like, fuck it. I crush life. And it hurts to have other women say that to you, more than men saying that. Like, oh, whatever, go find the brand of woman you want. But it's so painful to have women say that to you. And when this woman posted it to my public page, this free advice, Unsolicited, I sat on it and was like, do I verbally destroy this person? Or how do I respond?
Attack mode.
And I had said, I've tried it your way many times, because in corporate, I would try to be softer and wear what would be deemed as more feminine. And I said, I tried it your way. And not only did I not meet my intended goals, I resented who I was in the process. So I wasn't even able to be in my full expression. And I said, I don't know what is or isn't feminine with authority, but I do know telling another woman that what she does naturally isn't feminine, isn't feminine. And you had shared that. Do you have a question?
I do. Because I'm curious what the success would be. If you were more feminine, then what would happen in your life?
Excellent question.
Okay.
For that person.
Yeah.
Because there was no prompt to it. I was just posting my normal like wins or whatever. And and this unsolicited piece of advice came. I got a letter from this person like 5 or 6 years later.
Apologizing.
Essentially saying, I thought about your response for years and and really you being in your expression threatened my identity. And I'm thinking like, this is an AA. I didn't need this letter.
She needed the letter.
Yes. But it's something I hear all the time. And I hear it enough to where I would, up until recently, be like, am I? You always want to gut check. Like, am I doing something that is not appropriate, or am I not really being myself? Because people are like, you'd be so much happier if you were more feminine. I'm like, what does this mean? And I was sharing that with you, and you were saying that you would get that a bit too. And lacrosse, like I said, not like the daintiest sport in there. And you said it goes away after time. And I asked you, I was like, well, when did it go away? And you paused, and you're like, fuck. I'm gonna respond to this now, and then we can dive into it on the podcast if you want. But you're like, I didn't get the you're too masculine or not feminine enough when I married my now partner.
Yeah.
And then you paused again, you looked away, and you're like, when I was in quotation chosen. And I was like, dang it.
I used to get that all the time too. And where it's like, whether it's you're masculine or you're intimidating, which I'm sure you've probably heard.
What does that mean?
Before.
Help me understand.
I don't know. That you're intimidating to men, I guess, is what the message is. I think that was what the message was to me. That like standing in your, I don't even know what language she used. It feels like a little weird to be like standing in your truth, just because it sounds a bit corny, but it's like, I don't know, right? It's like just sort of being you, right? Like being your authentic self is something that is intimidating because there's whatever it is, like a clarity or a strength or a determination that is felt. And so I did used to get that quite a bit.
How did it feel when you would get it?
Like exhausting, I think.
That's a good word.
Yeah. Just like, okay, cool. I don't know what to do with this. And I think that is a common like, all right, I don't know, And yeah, I do remember you asking me that when we were chatting before, and like, oh yeah, when did you stop hearing that? And it's like, it is true that I stopped receiving that feedback when I partnered. And yeah, I don't know if it was, I think it was when we just started probably dating and, it was serious, because I don't know if we can only, I don't know, hypothesize here, but that if she's been chosen by this person, it must mean that she's choosable.
It's such a bummer.
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming you didn't become another person.
No, I didn't. I didn't. I think in relationship, there are so many things that Connor has like challenged within me. And I think there probably are parts where this like combativeness and because I did have a combativeness to me, certainly, that in relationship with him, there is enough safety for the parts of myself that were self-protective to come down. And that's an interesting thing to think about, because I think, again, with him, I do feel so safe and so seen, and I trust him, all the things that I don't need to come to battle with him in the way that I maybe felt like I had to before. And maybe that's the only thing that I can think about in terms of what shifted. If there was something that actually did shift within me, was like, oh, I have someone who's got me too. So I don't have to have me. I got it, right? Like as we were saying before, right?
It's just interesting that we label that feminine, because I could see that same thing happening to a man, like anybody. Like you're going from maybe a place of, I have to carry everything. Like, oh, someone's going to help me carry it. But we then give it a label. Because for me, it's a spectrum.
Right.
And we embody the whole thing. And I feel like whether it's society or experiences, women are really only allowed to play in this tiny little bracket of femininity.
Yeah.
And if you at all leave that area, you're automatically labeled too much of whatever else. When it's like, no, I just have my range is a little bit larger. And I have I think every woman should learn how to fight. I think everybody should take up martial arts or something, like our right to rage. There's like power and clarity and healing and confidence that comes with knowing how to hold your anger.
Yeah.
And express it in a way.
Oh yeah, embodied anger, right? It's, when
dope.
it's heart-centered. Yeah, it is. It's incredible.
Yeah.
When it rises to the head, right?
Break a pen.
Amazing. Perfect timing. That was great. I hope the video got that. Yeah, right. When it rises to our head, right? That's when it becomes aggressive.
Yeah,
And that's when it is dangerous. And that's when it doesn't feel safe to be around it. But embodied anger, right? Heart-centered anger, right? That is where people listen. Yeah. They're like, ooh, yes, tell me.
Yeah.
And it's, when we can access that, wow.
Yeah. I'm in negotiations right now, and I am the only woman in the room, and I am sitting on my side of the table by myself, and I'm aware of what's happening as I'm also delivering my side of the negotiation, and I'm really proud of myself. And I would not look at that and be like, look at her go, acting like a man. Like, no, look at her knowing exactly what she wants, how she wants it, and how to carry the room really well. And then there'll be moments where I'll catch myself softening something so I don't come across as a hard ass, but it's like, but that I kind of am in this negotiation. So it still plays in my mind, but the labeling, I guess 10 years ago, the labeling was masculine, feminine. Now it's all the other labels that come with therapy and the exploration of it. It can be a challenge. I tend to trigger or put off a very particular brand of woman who will then tell me you're too masculine. Yeah. And I'm like, notice how I have not one point said you're too feminine.
Right.
Notice how don't care how you show up, just show up.
Yeah. I think, there can be a lot of reasons for it, but I think sometimes the thing that we criticize or attack in someone else, is a part of ourselves that we've maybe disconnected from or had to reject, or somebody else rejected it and we've, lost contact with it to some degree. And yeah, I think the part of you that just continues to stay on your line and do you, is the part that you just keep on sticking with, but you don't need to figure everybody else out.
And trying to make friends, man.
I was trying to have some female friends in my life.
And to be fair, I have amazing female friends, and I love them, and they're every brand of woman. But the whole, how do you know if you can trust someone, trust them? Yeah. I get hurt a lot, especially in female friendships. Yeah. I don't know if they're ever really being my friend, or it comes out that they were my friend because they thought I was like sleeping with somebody in their lives, and they like bring them closer. And I'm like, I thought we were actually friends, guys. Or recently I had a friend who didn't know that I was around the corner and heard her describing me to her friends. And she's really aggressive. She's all these things. And I'm like, I've known you for so long. And like, you have seen me in so many iterations, but yet you still only see me in this authoritative way. And so it's just like, it hurts. Totally. And I'm not going to tell her I overheard it. So I'm just like, that conversation wasn't meant for me. And so I don't want to jump and be like, oh, gotcha type of thing. So that's where it comes from. It's like, with all of my wounding, with all of my imperfections, I do deeply love the kind of woman I've become. I always said the kind of woman I wanted to be when I grew up. And this is something that I hope to explore in therapy is I know I love myself a lot. I also don't know if I think that who I am is lovable based on those experiences. And to me, it's an interesting thing to hold space for these two truths. I'm not going to change who I am to be worthy of somebody or somebody's when it comes to friendships. But I also accept that maybe who I am doesn't work for the people that I'm around. And so I challenge myself as, is it environmental? Am I lying to myself when I don't really love myself? Like I go through that whole thing of trying to understand.
Yeah, but I think when you don't have the experience of having your full story connected to and understood and still having someone choose you and love you and want, and when I say choose you, I mean you too, right? The reciprocity of that. But
You're selecting them too, everybody.
Yes, you're always selecting them as well, right? But it's like when you don't have that experience of, oh, that can happen, then the jury's out, and you can sit here and you can say like, I do love myself and I do like myself and I continue to work on the parts of myself that, like sometimes are unhealthy or sometimes are dysfunctional and I can also still have compassion and grace for those parts, even if not every part of me 100% of the time is operating, in the way that I would like it to. And also I want to believe that there are people out there who would come towards this. I just don't have the experience yet. Like the data points aren't fully there for me to be like, yes, I know this is truth for me right now. I know that someone is going to take all of this and know exactly what to do with it, and that we get to expand, and heal together even more.
Do you ever find, or did you find when you were in the I got this mode, that if you did ever demonstrate, I don't got this, it sort of jarred everybody around you?
But I didn't do it often. Like that was not revealed very much. But yes, me not being okay
freaks everybody out.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, just kidding. I got it.
Freaks everybody out.
Yeah. I have that a lot too, where again, better now. I've done quite a bit of work in the last few years of understanding who's around me, but it can also feel really isolating where I'm someone who can say I'm not okay, but I say it so as a matter of fact that people are like, are you sure you're not okay? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm spiraling. Are you kidding me? The sky is literally falling.
It doesn't look like it, doesn't appear like it.
Right. Cause I use my words and I also get told like, you should express your emotions. I'm like, but I'm telling you, but there are very key moments in my life, like a major death, an attack, things of that nature, where I am saying I need help, I am not okay. And it's making everybody uncomfortable that the leader, the coach is not okay, and they retreat. And then, well, now I'm hurt because if you didn't know what was going on and you couldn't show up, that's on me. But I've now told you I'm not okay. And I've told you how to show up, and you're uncomfortable with me showing a lack of stability. And then it's like, shit.
Yeah. And it's still something that's worth practicing. Like I had to practice that too, to be like, I'm struggling or I need support or, here's what's going on in my life, and to pull people into that space, friends and, a therapist, right? It's like, meaning me going to therapy, right? It's like it's a practice. And again, like I think the discernment muscle is the thing that hopefully strengthens to see who can do that, who can't, right? Who, like, with whom is it actually safe to share that, and know that people are actually going to be able to support, right? To be able to say like, I actually need help, sometimes those words, gosh, right? It's like I said it before, to say some of these words for the first time out loud can, be pretty significant.
How often are you in therapy?
Weekly.
And in therapy, do you talk about just your life stuff, or do you sometimes download about a tough week with patients?
Mostly my stuff. Yeah, like 98% of the time, my stuff. How appropriate
Do you think it is for therapists to share their personal lives with their patients to connect?
Has to be a very intentional thing. You self-disclose when the self-disclosure is going to be something that is supportive of where the client is. You never self-disclose when you're in the middle of something, right? Only when you're on the other side of it. And it's never about you, right? It has to always be in service of them. So listen, like obviously my life is a little bit more public, And so like, I've been on podcasts before. People know that my parents went through a divorce, right? If they've ever listened to something like that. So that's not uncommon, but I can remember times maybe before I was a little bit more public facing, where I remember people going through a divorce, a client going through a divorce and, having a child and being so scared that the child was going to, be so damaged and like, so afraid of this, that, and the other. And I remember very intentionally self-disclosing and just saying like, I want you to know that my parents went through a divorce. And even though it was really hard for me as a child, right? Like I was able to, find my way through. And like, I shared some of the details of it. And again, not as a distraction, but I think as a moment for that person to feel like, oh, the person in front of me who I really respect and admire, who like has turned into, a integrated adult in the world, right? Is like, there is a path in which my child too can find their way. And I think sometimes when a person is spiraling or struggling in those moments, like they have to see something to hold on to. And I remember that person saying like, I can't tell you how much that helps me in this moment right now to like know that is an experience that you went through and to see where you are today and to like respect where you are and to hope and trust that will be, a journey that my child, finds themselves on too, right? So it should not be about you. It should not be very often. It should be deeply intentional. And it always needs to be once it's like placed for you. It cannot be messy for you at all.
What about the opposite? How do you feel about a therapist who shares absolutely nothing? It's very clinical. Do you think that that's still as effective, or do you think that makes some challenges?
To each their own. I think some people appreciate that. And obviously there's certain, modalities of therapy that are, that way. So whatever the client likes, but what I've found generally is most people really appreciate seeing the humanness in their therapist. And they don't need to know every detail of your life, but they appreciate being reminded that like, yes, you are a human too. Then I don't have you held up on some pedestal of like, you're never affected and you never go through any struggle or you never this or you never that. So I think that it feels so far from one another. And I don't think hierarchy is good for that. It's like that we want to be right here with each other. So, but again, some people really appreciate I don't want to know anything about you. You're the blank slate therapist, right? Is sort of a classic way that it used to be and still to this day in some modalities. And for some people, that's very helpful.
I have a question on EMDR, but is that something that you've implemented or used?
It's not something that I am trained in. I have some clinicians in my practice who are trained in it. It's interesting, I think very helpful for trauma. Not for you.
I'll do the tapping over and over and over again, and to the point where I feel bad for the therapist. Like, how does that go? I feel better, thank you. Because I just felt so bad. So that's why I had questions on it, because I was told by a therapist, they actually said you might be too smart for EMDR, and that's such like what does that mean?
But also maybe not the right clinician if you can't tell them that it didn't work.
Well, it was because like 4 or 5 times the clock was running out in a row, and I was like, we have like 5 minutes left, and I don't want to keep tapping for 5 minutes. I want to talk.
You can also just say that.
Okay. I'm like, I don't want to do it again.
You can just say that. But for so many people do.
I have so many friends that have done EMDR, both with the tapping and with the eye movement, and that's why I was so stoked on it.
Yeah, and you do it virtually or in person?
I've done both.
Yeah. And it's been the same either way.
I don't know why. In the beginning, I thought I'm just doing it wrong.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure your thoughts on it.
I do really believe that in many ways that the different types of therapy, it's as many people as there are on the planet.
Right.
It's like trying to fit into models sometimes it can make us feel like, what's wrong with me? Why isn't this work? And it's like, it might not be your path. It is for some people. Some people obviously think it's incredible and it's been deeply healing for them and it's been the only thing that's worked.
Right.
Amazing.
Right.
But when it's like, oh, this doesn't work for me, and I've tried it and I've tried it with different clinicians, and it's like, this isn't the path that's going to lead me to the thing. So what I'll say is, I do believe that there are as many different modalities of therapy as there are humans. The one thing that I can't get by is not looking at your family of origin as a part of the work, and I say that in the book. It's like, listen, you don't have to go my way.
Right.
You don't have to do it this way. I trust in your ability to choose a path. But what I will tell you is that anybody who's trying to do therapy without exploring the systems they grew up in, you are missing out. I don't even know how you do therapy. I don't even know how, truly. I'm serious. I don't even know how you no, that's got to be a part of it.
With gut health. I was like, wait, you're just taking aspirin? You're just doing, whoa. What are you eating?
Yeah.
When we're not talking
rewind
about
it. Go back to here. Please humor me. Let's see what happens.
Are there any cases or wins that you can share where the client is an athlete, a professional athlete?
Yes, I've worked with professional athletes. And I think I said this before about that fear that if I do this work, I'm going to lose my edge. And I do see that a lot with athletes and high performers, high achievers. And
so I don't know if we're keeping it in that particular episode, but I had an athlete on, and we were talking about athletes with long careers. They meet their partners when they're athletes. And they have to turn off all their emotions for their career. And when the career's over and they now get to feel everything they haven't been feeling, their partners accuse them of being a completely different person, that you're not who I married. Right. And it's like, I am, but this is just what was being shelved. And then the divorce rate for retired athletes, they said, is now 9 out of 10.
The relational impact, the family structure impact is really significant. And, I wish there was more of a way to merge and to see if we could be as successful on the field, on the court, whatever, and feel actually successful in your relationships and relationship to self even. And so I would say the successes would be when that is something that people dabble in more, right? Where they allow themselves to have more of those intimate conversations, to open up more, to not see that as a weakness, to be able to address what's happening at home while also addressing what's happening on the field and court.
Because something's always happening at home. I think a lot of people, they just view athletes as products that are just running around.
Something is always happening, right? Because it's all of us, right? They're not the exceptions. Oh, you don't have any issues at home, or you're not struggling in your relationship, or somebody's not upset with you about something. It's like,
your child's in the hospital, your parent just passed away, and you've got to go out there and perform.
And so there is obviously something mentally that shifts, and you kind of come back into focus on something. But I think the beautiful work maybe behind the scenes, where people are actually making space to have hard conversations with a partner, or sharing at least with me about what's happening in their lives and opening up. To me, those are wins.
And do you see that translate to their performance, to sort of give some hope to athletes who are I want to do this, but I'm not ready?
Totally. I mean, listen, I'm a whole body right, where it's if you are happier, if you are more connected, if you don't feel, if the level of stress is going down, right? If all of those things are happening, of course you're going to perform better. Because even if you are really good at compartmentalizing, right? It's if you've just gotten a text message, if there's something's going down, right? You're not addressing it, remember what we said, pain's knock, 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 knock. I'm going to keep knocking. In inopportune times, that free throw, I'm coming for you. Right? It's just I'm going to be here. I'm going to find a way.
The ball don't lie.
The ball don't lie, right? So yes. Again, we don't need to try this out in a high stakes moment, right? But to begin to trust that there is an integration that can happen, where it's let's address the stuff that's happening in your life. It is happening whether or not you want to look at it or not, right? And if you are feeling connected, if you're feeling intimacy, love, right? It's like all of those things we know improve the overall quality of our health and our lives and our work, all of it.
Sticking with performance, now moving into the body, do you have cases that you can talk about or ones you can talk about where someone may have been complaining about an ailment or a pain in their body and then may have noticed that as they did the work, that went away?
I had a session with a client where I did self-disclose something recently, and I was getting a facial, and it was with someone who I immediately could tell was very new at the job, and I was lying on the table. And I don't get that. I don't take a lot of moments for myself. Like, I'm working a lot. I've got a kiddo, you know, all the things, right? So I'm taking this hour,
I'm super stoked
right?
to do that.
I'm taking this hour, and I'm like so looking forward to it. I lie down, and immediately I'm like, oh no, right? I'm just sitting there, like letting her do her thing. She's like barely touching my face, and all this stuff is going on. I'm like, oh, you know, I can feel the agita in my body. And no, not saying anything. She's young. I don't want to insult her, you know, whatever. And I'm like, all right, maybe it'll get better. Okay, all the stuff that doesn't get better. 35 minutes in, 40 minutes, right? All this stuff. I begin to have a coughing fit. Coughing. Can't stop coughing. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I promise I'm not sick. You know, I don't know what's going on.
Sick
I'm like,
of this facial.
I'm like, no, I do know what's going on.
Yeah.
I know that I'm not speaking up, right? I know that I'm not saying anything, and my body is responding to me not saying stuff, because now I actually do say stuff. I before, I'm good, I'm fine, everything. No, but the moment my body's like, oh shit, she's lying here and she's pretending like she's fine. I'm not fine. This is not good. This is, it's so bad that it's agitated, right? I don't know if you ever had that experience.
100%.
Yeah, right? And so I'm having this coughing fit, and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what it is. And I still don't say anything because we're nearing the end. But I share it with a client because she was telling me that she was getting this, it was in her throat, and her asthma was problematic, and she was coughing and all these things. And we were talking about what was going on, you know, outside in her life. And she's like, I'm feeling very resentful at work. I'm not having conversations with my bosses about certain things, but I know that I need to be, and And she was supposed to have a town hall meeting the next day. And she was asking if I had any recommendations. And I share what happens in this facial. And I said, I think my best recommendation for you is, even if you're not ready, prepared to say to your boss what you need to say just yet, to still speak it out loud, right? To do that tomorrow before you need to give your presentation and do your town hall meeting, and to just speak out loud the things that you need to do so that you don't have this, you know, let's see if you don't have a coughing fit. Following week, she's like, honestly, I can't even, my asthma is gone. She's like, this is so stupid. Yeah. Like one of those, she's like, this is really dumb, but like my asthma is gone. I can breathe. My throat is open, all this stuff. Right. And I think, you know, so I share that because it's, you know, it's a simple one, but it's sort of this idea of, yeah, like when you're paying attention to your body and noticing what's happening and like what it is that we're resisting, what it is that we're not giving attention to, right? And how it's manifesting in the body. And this was just like a, you know, kind of a funny example of it, but legitimate, right? And so that's the most recent one that happened.
It's funny, not funny though, because I keep trying to tell my audience, my clients, like sometimes the persistent pain we can't figure out, especially with my athletes, like if we've exhausted everything else. Yeah. I know it's outside my lane, but can you go to therapy? Because I've hit it with nutrition. We've hit it with body work. We've hit it with everything but the emotional work. And I can't do that for you. Right.
And that's where having a team, right, is so important, right? Where it's like, yeah, you're a nutritionist, or your therapist, or, you know, a rolfer, or you know, where it's like people are really working with this stuff. I worked, this was incredible, but a dear friend of mine, Erica Bloom, who is a master rolfer in New York City, and also Pilates instructor, but the person who knows the most about the body that I've ever met in my life. We did a session with a client of hers who's somebody I know, but I don't work with this person as a client. And I came in and we co-led this session where I led the person through the emotional stuff, and Erica, my friend, worked on her body simultaneously. Yes. And it was incredible. We had never done it before, but we were testing it out because I think we're going to do a retreat, next year at some point, or later this year at some point.
I'll do the nutrition.
And the woman whom she's worked with, Erica, for years. And again, I know her sort of on a friendly level, and she trusts me. So it worked. But they were saying that the amount of trauma that was released and the integration afterwards, how much it stuck. It was really with her and still is today, because we keep checking in to see, what's happening. Incredible, and so it was so cool to be a part of that, where her eyes are closed on the table.
Make this a curriculum. This is what I mean by taking the field in another direction. Yeah. I fully on board for that.
Yeah. And she was like, I'm so happy to be the guinea pig because I trust both of you. Let's see. And if nothing happens, great. And then the release, everything. And so Erica and I were really working together quite, the woman was lying with her eyes closed. Our eyes are open. We're there with her. We're watching what the other person is doing, going at the pace the other person is going, pausing when we need to pause. And it was beautiful.
I feel like that's what we did back in the days when we were just a tribe. Healing wasn't, I'm going to go to this one person. It was hands-on work.
Yeah.
And more than one person helping facilitate the healing for the person that's not well.
Yes.
So powerful.
Multiple hands together.
Super powerful.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you like to get into podcasts, or anything that I did talk about that you were like, I want to explore that further?
Oh my gosh. I could talk to you for hours. We could go and go and go. Okay. No, I think what I'll say is, and I mentioned before that I do hold compassion and grace for everyone without that excusing their behavior. And, I think for so many of us as adult, I don't work with kids, but I work with humans who all have been kids before. That our relationships sometimes with our family can be really complicated as we're moving through this work. And when there's an exercise at the end of the book that a psychotherapist, Michael Kerr, has offered before, which is to think of your mother as your grandmother's daughter and see, how that changes the perspective. And it's not an invitation to, again, let people off the hook or say, okay, there's context, so I guess it's okay, right? But to remember that we're all tiny humans in complicated systems with a lot of layers that sometimes we know something about, right? We might know some of the details of our parents' or our grandparents' lives, but we certainly don't know it all. And we don't know all of the layers. And to remember, right, that, okay, my partner was also a tiny human. My dear friend was a tiny human. This stranger was a tiny human. My mother was a tiny human. My father was a tiny human, right? Everybody was a tiny human in this complicated system. And if I can remember that, what shifts for me? And so I do think that balance of grace and compassion with accountability and ownership and responsibility,
boundaries,
yes, is vital. You don't need to let people back into your life. You don't have to accept certain things. It is.
You can see them for the child portion of them and have deep compassion. The helper in me wants to be like, but then I have to put up that boom, the wall has to come up.
Yeah, and it can, and it does for many people. But when we lose the line with the child part, then I think things get very confusing. And I also think it means that we kind of disconnect from our own child too. And I think that's the part here is that you need to have grace and compassion for your human self, but you also need to be accountable because it's not everybody else all the time. You know, like it's so much more palatable to think that like this person started the fight and the conflict. And if you hadn't been so defensive, then I wouldn't have this and da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, you have to see your part in this. You have to see how you're participating in your life and in your relationships. Because if it's everybody else's fault all the time, if it's like, oh, but I wouldn't have responded if they hadn't done this, like you are captive. You're captive. And so this book is also about really stepping into the driver's seat. I am kind and thoughtful to everyone while also asking you to see yourself and to be like, it's not always just them. It's not. Right. And so it can be hard to look at that part, but I hope that this book is a nice invitation for people to do that and to begin to lean into that, because change can happen. I get to see that every day, which is, you know, the luckiest part of my job.
And you're just getting warmed up.
I'm just getting
because you have your own podcast.
Yes.
Can you talk about the nomination?
Oh yeah, I know. Yes. I just found out. You are blowing me up here. I know. Yeah. Okay, so I have a podcast called This Keeps Happening, where I speak with anonymous guests about something that they're struggling with in their life, a pattern, you know, a wound, whatever, and we just I guess we started coming out with episodes in September, late September. And yeah, it just got nominated for an iHeartRadio award for best in like advice and inspiration. And
alongside,
I know, Michelle Obama, Glennon Doyle, Chelsea Handler, like there's 5 of us. I'm like,
what an honor for them to be alongside you. What an honor.
Gosh, thanks. I'm like, what happened? I got the news on the way here. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this podcast has barely been out. But amazing. And I think it's what's so cool, right? Is like why I think the book is really special and why the podcast is special is because I do a lot of storytelling in the book. And I think sometimes it is easier for us to find ourselves in other people's stories, right? To listen to someone on a podcast and hear a struggle that they're going through and either self-identify with it or know that, oh, like, that's my partner or like, that's my child or that's my father. And yeah, the range of people I have on the show is amazing, right? Some younger people, some people who are in their 70s, 60s, right? It's like, and so that I think is the coolest part of it is that you learn through other people's stories. And sometimes
it's also you. Can you take some credit, please?
Thanks. Okay.
Like you're the facilitator of this. You're the one that's conducting the stories. You're creating the thing that's getting put out into this world. You did the work. You created a book.
Thank you.
There's an element of this nomination that's you.
Fair. I will receive that.
Okay. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I know, like, they're amazing. They're incredible. They did well. Yeah. So yes, I mean, the nomination is enough. I'm like, oh my, that's so cool. And
is iHeartRadio, is that listener votes then? Or
I honestly have no clue. Because there's no like voting thing. It just showed the nominations.
Anyone who works for iHeartRadio that listens to this podcast, I'll slip
Make
you.
it happen.
I'll slip you like let's go.
Some
let's
paleo
go.
cookies.
Let's go.
So cool. So anyway, I feel deeply, deeply honored and amazing that a different way of learning, because I didn't want to do I didn't want to do an expert to expert podcast. Like so many people do that so well already. But when they came up with the idea,
you say that, I call it circle jerk. I'm like,
like
we're going to see the same people on everyone's podcast. I'm on the same things. Oh, what are they going to talk about now?
I know, but this is like, where it's like, this is like really interesting to get to be in conversation with people who are struggling with the same stuff that everybody's struggling with, right? And to like learn that way.
We want depth again. We want to be invited into something that has some soul.
Yes.
And I'm loving seeing the shift of people wanting to gravitate towards that content and those people.
Yes.
Like I know there's always like, it's time for good people to win. No, it really is. And it's happening and it's amazing. So I am not surprised that that's happening. I've seen your rise from as far as like social media getting it. I'm like, yes. Make her louder.
Yeah, I know. Gosh.
Everyone's quieter.
They don't like to make it louder though.
No, they don't.
It's
If it's
a
real,
struggle. I know.
if it's real, it's like, I don't get it. I really don't. I'm not really into conspiracies, but I'm like,
I know.
but this is good.
I know. Well, there's a divide. I know how to write a post that'll get a lot of likes, and I also know how to write a post that I want to write.
Right.
And I do the latter.
Right.
You know, and it obviously it still does well,
Yes.
but it's like, you know, I can make it what it needs to be, but I'm not trying to fit in.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to belong to myself. And
I don't think I ever will be one of the cool kids, and I'm okay with it.
You're the cool kid.
What are you looking forward to next?
What am I looking forward to next? That's a hard question.
That wasn't a leading question.
That was a leading question.
No, it wasn't. I swear to God.
I'm like, shit. Okay, how do I answer this? Let's see. Well, I'm very fascinated about the final chapter in our lives and what it looks like to reconcile and, you know, be in relationship with parents who are dying and, you know, the decade before, whatever it is. But I'm very curious about what people's goal might be in terms of reconciliation as we enter into that stage, both from the perspective of the adult child and of the aging parent. Right? It's like, are there things that do need to be said? Just what happens if somebody doesn't want to say anything? Right? Like, what happens if change never takes place? Is there a path to peace no matter what? And without having to control the other person. And so I'm fascinated by that. And so I don't know when that will be, but right now.
I mean, the fact that you know that that's the thing too, that's so great, really powerful. Yeah. I've done hospice work as a volunteer, and that ending, the role was to make sure they're comfortable, give them company, but also calling the family members, which is a big task for a teenager. I don't like it. This was some really advanced volunteer work. But
it's so beautiful. You know, I think that death it is not always this, but it can be a very beautiful experience. And unfortunately, you know, we here live in a very death-phobic, grief-phobic society compared to some other cultures, right, who talk about it and like bring that forward to their children in a much different way. And so, I think that we're very frightened of it, and we don't know how to befriend it, and we don't know how to make it beautiful. And that's sad to me, because I would hope when my dog died a few years ago, we were there with him for his final breaths. He was at home with us, and being that close to death, like holding his paws, right, like head on his heart, right, was such a profound experience for me. And I remember right after he died, I was like, I could only wish that everybody got to die like that, loved and held and safe and secure. And again, I know that is not what happens for so many people, but it felt like such a yearning almost, that it was like, oh, it could be so special. And so, there's something about that experience. I mean, certainly personally in what we got to experience with him, but I do think about, you know, I have aging parents. My father is soon approaching 87, I think. And you know, having been someone who has always had an older father, right? My dad was 48 when he had me.
Oh, wow.
You know, that's always been on my mind, even though he had been youthful for a long period. But, you know, it's like I with it coming, and a death is also coming in our family pretty soon here too. You know, it's just, my clients have been talking about it. It's just it's around me right now.
And sometimes there is no reconciliation. There was one of the calls I had to make where the family was all happy that person was passing, and like,
or that it's relieving.
16-year-old, I'm like, oh, okay, how do I what?
Yeah. Yes.
Where's my advisor?
Totally.
You gotta step in here.
Yeah. I don't know what to say.
But it's the more I've learned about you, the more commonalities I see in some of the things I experienced. I remember as a kid having a keen sense of mortality because we had a lot of death growing up. My parents are the youngest in their big family. So by that time, most people are passing away and a lot of my friends have passed away. But I remember at a young age, like 4 or 5, my dad would come home, talk to my mom about his day. My mom would be home. They both worked. So they come home around the same time. And then I was just sitting on the bed and they were just having a normal conversation. And I just started sobbing. I stood up on the bed and started sobbing. And they're like, what's wrong? And I just said, you're going to die one day. Yeah. Just like that. Like just knowing that and not really understanding what death was, but saying you're going to die one day. And that sort of set a path of wanting everyone around me to feel as good as they possibly can, be as healthy as they can. Let's like figure out the hard stuff. And there's not a day that goes by I don't think about death on some level.
But it's like to improve the quality of the death. We talk a lot about improving the quality of life, right? But there's something about improving the quality of what the death experience
Hospice can be so sad.
Yeah.
The facilities, it's so sterile and clinical.
Yeah.
And that's why they had people come in and volunteer to create these really close connections.
I think that if I ever did some type of career shift, which would be more of like an extension, not necessarily a shift, but I don't know if you've heard of death doulas. Yeah. But that's something that I feel close to in some way, and to get to be some type of conduit for the family, and especially obviously with the amount of work that I've done with family systems already. But yeah, there's just something, I don't know. I feel so a little powerful called to that. Yeah, that'll be later. That'll be way down the road, but maybe when I am an elder.
The way you said it. An elder.
I got some time. There's a lot of wisdom. You
got this other practice too that you were saying, the retreats. That'd be really interesting. The hands-on treatment.
Yeah. Hopefully going to do a retreat sometime this year. It'll definitely be later down. My husband and I have done lots of work together, which has been so special. I love working with him. He's such an incredible facilitator.
Did he just come on your show? That was a new thing?
Yeah, and that'll air on February 14th.
Aww.
I know. We talk about his origin wound.
Yeah.
It's a really beautiful conversation, actually.
Look forward to that.
Yeah.
What's your name of the show is?
This Keeps Happening.
This Keeps Happening.
Yeah.
Tell people where to find you on social.
Yeah. So Instagram is where I do most of my stuff. So Mindful MFT, as in marriage family therapy. New York couples counseling. If we do the therapy practice does service clients in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Florida, and California, which is incredible, and would love to keep expanding that a bit. So if you live in any of those states and are looking for a therapist who has a similar framework, right? Obviously, each person's personality is a little bit different, but the practice is there. We do see in person in New York, but that's the only place that we have an in-person office. And yeah, I mean,
what about if somebody's a therapist and they want to go through your curriculum and maybe join your practice?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that's been something that I've been thinking about. I'm going to be speaking at the Psychotherapy Network or Symposium in Washington, D.C. in March, where I'm going to be doing essentially it's like a training in origin work. But a lot of people have been saying like, you should create a curriculum and training therapists how to do this work. So that's, I don't know, TBD. Like I'm thinking about that. And like to also bring them into the practice if it aligns as well. So yeah, so we've got some good stuff coming up, and having fun with the podcast and the show, and everything that I do, you can find in the link in my bio on Instagram. So that's the best place.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for making the time to come on.
Of course. Thank you for this beautiful conversation.
And that is it on today's episode. Thanks so much for hanging out. Your time and attention never goes unappreciated. If anything in today's show stood out to you, I encourage you to share it to social and tag me. That is how you can help a little independent show like mine grow. And of course,
Rate, review, and subscribe to Eat, Play, Crush wherever it is you get your podcasts. If you want to follow me, I'm at Paleo Chef on social media, or the show at Eat, Play, Crush. You want to stay in touch via my newsletter or get your hands on the gut reset, visit eatplaycrush.com. And until next time, be well, do good, and trust your gut.